Are you loving the Categorically Romance podcast? Are you looking for even more places to get your romance fix? Do you rewatch When Harry Met Sally every fall?
Yeah, we thought so. Check out Meet Cute's newest podcast, The Rom-Com Room, where rom-com connoisseurs Kendra and Mercedes unite each Friday to nerd out about their favorite rom-coms, their love to hates, and every crush and romantic detail in between.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Categorically Romance podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Bree.
And today, as of recording this, the Blaze Project has officially begun. And joining us for this is author Sarah Mayberry. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Please tell us about yourself.
Hi, guys. Everybody. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I can't remember how many books I wrote for Blaze, but they were my first published books, as well as writing romance novels. I write for television and film here in Australia, and I'm married. I have a little dog, and yeah, that's pretty much me.
Oh, okay, real quick. What's the biggest difference between writing for a novel and writing for television?
Thank you, Aaron. That was my question. That is so cool. Yes, what's the difference?
Obviously, so TV and film are visual storytelling. They're visual mediums. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of talk about show, not tell in screenwriting. And in novels, you can obviously go inside somebody's head and hear their thoughts and, be told what their feelings are rather than having to interpret what an actor is emoting. So they're two sort of, I think they do complement each other. I think that writing for TV makes my dialogue in my books stronger and more realistic than perhaps it would have been otherwise. I do probably tend to put what's called sort of action lines or big print in scripts. I probably put too much in there because I'm a novelist. I think books are harder because they're longer, and and you just you do everything with a book. TV and film are collaborative, and at a certain point you hand over your script to other people and they start interpreting your words and putting their creative ideas into the project, and that's not the case with a book. And that control thing is a blessing when you're loving your book, and a curse when you're getting lots of collaboration and it's going in a different direction when you're doing a screen project. But they both have their joys.
Wow. Okay. Is there just as much like emotional investment in that? Like, does it bother you sometimes when the script is handed off and they're like, oh no, we're changing this and this?
Yeah. All writing is an act of creation, and where you put parts of yourself into everything. So you obviously handed in something that you thought fit the brief and hit the marks. And then, if other people don't sort of share that vision, it's never nice to know that you sort of something hasn't sort of hit the mark or, landed with people. Yeah.
Right.
Resonated is the word I'm looking for.
Well, speaking of novels, what is the hallmark of a Sarah Mayberry romance?
I think they're emotional. I like to try and, even if I put my characters in kind of interesting or crazy jobs or situations where, maybe the average person, they've got more money than the average person, or in a situation that maybe average people wouldn't be involved in, I like to think that their emotions and the way they deal with each other and their family, etc., are relatable. I like to think that you can have a bit of a laugh and maybe a bit of a cry when you're reading one of my books. I like to, if I don't cry at least once every book, I feel like I'm doing something wrong at my end. And what else? The bedroom door is always open, except in a small handful of my books. I would say they're obviously sex positive, and I really like giving my heroines cool and interesting careers because I love researching them and imagining what that life would be like.
We love to hear romance origin stories. So can you share with us how you became both a romance reader and writer?
So both of my grandmothers were romance readers. My mum was not, but we used to go and stay with both my sets of grandparents. And so my maternal grandmother, Nana Wade, she always had these big English hardcover romance novels. I can't remember who the publisher was. And then my dad's mother, Nan Mayberry, she had Mills and Boons, and they were those. I feel like they were the 70s, so maybe she didn't buy them super new. She might have got them secondhand or something, because it would have been the early 80s when I was starting to read these. And she, and there was lots of women being pushed against the wall and being told they were gold diggers by some rich, powerful surgeon or Formula One racing car driver or something like that. So I loved that. And then I got into Sweet Dreams and Sweet Valley High. I did my own sort of not terribly imaginative riff on that, writing about all of my school friends as a sort of serial when I was in high school, and I would give all of my friends, the boys they were crushing on as fictional boyfriends in my little Sweet Valley High ripoff. And then I knew I wanted to be a writer, so I went and I studied literature and professional writing. I got a Bachelor of Arts, and there was a fiction class that was supposed to be a part of that, and the guy who taught that was a very literary writer himself, and that was what he wanted us to write. And I can remember handing in my first assignment to him and him asking me to come see him in his office, and he told me very sternly that I had written what the sort of story that would be published in what used to be called women's magazines. And he didn't say it in a good way. he said it in a like, I will be, we'll be getting this out of you sort of away. And so I ended up dropping his subject, and he was right. I do write the sort of writing that is published in women's magazines, and that's what I wanted to write, and that's what I love reading. So I went away and I started trying to write a full-length romance novel, and I submitted to Harlequin, Mills and Boon, I don't know how many times, so many times. I tried to write a Regency romance because I was loving them at the time.
Yeah.
And Harlequin had that Regency line there for a while, and I had all of them, every single one. And then I'd also discovered Georgette Heyer, so I was decided that was what I wanted to write, but I was not very good at those. And then I finally got rejected enough times to go, okay, maybe this isn't going to happen. And I sort of concentrated on my 9-to-5 job, which was at the time working for a sort of a trade magazine that dealt with the hardware industry. And then I got a job in television, and I was working in the story room on a soap opera, and we plotted a long, slow burn romance between these two characters. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I would have my characters prior to this epiphany moment in the story room. I would always have my characters in scenes, and they would both know what the other person was thinking somehow through some act of telepathy. And there was no unknown. And I mean, that was something I always think as being one of my first sort of romance lessons that I learned for myself, is that romance is about the danger of not knowing whether the other person returns your feelings or not.
Yeah.
And there's a risk. There's a huge risk in that. And that if you don't have that tension and that fear, then there's none of the excitement and the anticipation and all that sort of stuff as well. And so I took some time off work, and I spent 3 months writing what became Can't Get Enough. And I sent it off. I sent it off for their Love and Laughter line at Mills and Boon, or Harlequin, and it folded while my book was out on submission. And I waited for a year, and I had not heard anything back. And then I finally decided that I was going to be brave and ring up. So I did. I rang Canada in the middle of the night, and I got onto my editor, Wanda Otterwell, and she said, oh, I emailed you ages ago. I really liked your story. and I've been wondering why I haven't heard from you, why you didn't resubmit. And
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't believe it. And I got off the phone and I contacted my brother and said, because he's an IT guy, and I said, why would I have not gotten this email? And he had a look and he realised that he had not applied some update to our mail server or something, blah, blah. And there was all this email floating around out there in the ether that I'd never seen. And down comes this request for me to have another look at this story. And so thank God I made that phone call. My whole life.
Lesson learned. Yeah. Make the phone call just to be sure.
And it's so intimidating when you're sitting at that front end of your writing career as well. Editors seem like these untouchable gods, and then, it's a business and they need product. And especially with category romances, they need to be, putting out X many titles every month. They need writers. And when you start sort of thinking that this is a business that we're in together and that they need me and I need them, it sort of makes it a little bit less intimidating.
Yeah.
Okay, so Love and Laughter is a line that's been touched on. Aaron, you read something from Love and Laughter, correct?
Yes, I did. Yes, it was the first of the Matchmaking Mamas.
Yeah, that's like literally the only time that line has been mentioned on the podcast. So, you submitted to it. Can you talk about that line for anyone who has yet to read anything from it? Like, why did you submit to Love and Laughter?
Well, because it was romantic comedy, and I'm trying to remember, beloved romance author, Welcome to Temptation, Jennifer Creasy. Jennifer Creasy wrote an amazing book for them. Let me quickly Google it. Yes, Anyone But You. And it was Love and Laughter, and it was the first time that, because I'd been reading a lot of presents, so, desert sheiks and CEOs having affairs with their secretaries or cleaners and whatever. And then I read this, and it was about two people who were equals. And, she's older than him and divorced, and he lives downstairs. And honestly, it was so funny and real, and I just was like, this is what I want to write. I want to write this sort of contemporary romance. And so, as I said, that line unfortunately didn't last very long. So when I eventually got to the point where, Wanda was sort of, we were talking about me doing revisions to Can't Get Enough, she said to me, so my options were to write for Temptation, which was not being sold in the North American market at that time, I believe, or I could angle towards Blaze, which was being sold everywhere. And I was like, well, that's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? I'm going to write for the one with the bigger market. And then we began the job of her sort of edging me towards my characters getting it on much earlier in the narrative than was in the manuscript. And that was so funny because they get the essential premise, I don't know if you guys have looked at it, but is that they get stuck in the lift with each other. And I think in the original version they kissed and then they got rescued, and then I think Wanda was like, what if they just got like pretty hot and heavy and then they got rescued? And then I wrote that and then I sent that into her, and then she's like, I think they should just do it. And I was like, okay. And I kind of feel like I wish she'd said that right from the start, because I would have been on board for that. That was no problem whatsoever.
That's all you had to say.
I know what you need, lady. I'll get it. Oh, they can do that. That's fine.
Wow. Okay, so what did the world of romance publishing look like as you were entering into it? So, we're getting Can't Get Enough. We know it's going to be part of Blaze, but like, what world were you entering into back then?
Honestly, it was so mysterious to me. I asked a lot of questions when I first got published. I asked how much I could expect to earn from the book. I was told it varies. I wanted, I asked how many of these can I write a year. At that point in time, I'm pretty sure I was told no more than 3 books. And I was like, okay. They sort of were quite, I think Mills and Boon have always been quite sort of cagey about numbers. And I understand that they can't guarantee that anyone's going to get anything from a book that they publish. But in category, they do have a sort of baked in market. And it was a bit frustrating that they didn't share that information, especially with a new writer. And so there was that. But really, I feel in hindsight, looking back, I look back on it and I think that I kind of came in just on the tail end of the glory years of category romance, and was there for sort of long enough to appreciate, to basically, watch the arrival of digital and what that did to our numbers and to category romance, really. I mean, it expanded massively. Self-publishing took off hugely. There was the rise of the digital-only publishers, and you could just sort of see our numbers tank massively because that huge advantage that Mills and Boon Harlequin had always had, which was that they kind of owned the shelves in the bookshops, which was the place where you bought your books, right, back then. They'd lost that advantage, and there was suddenly like an open field for all these new players. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, just so much was changing, even with just the technology of communication and things like that. So I'm going to take it back to Can't Get Enough real quick. So you mentioned that there's the stuck in the elevator moment. So for someone like myself who's an aspiring writer, sometimes I find myself drifting away or pushing myself away from ideas that I would consider cliche sometimes. But can you give aspiring writers, I guess, permission to just write what you're feeling when you're feeling it?
Oh, absolutely. I love writing cliches. I mean, I think, we call them tropes, don't we, in romance and also in soap opera land where I do my other writing. But, evil twins, amnesia, all of those sort of crazy soap stories, but then also, all of the fantastic mistaken identity and brothers, best friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think you can just have enormous fun. In fact, for the last series of books that I wrote for them, I actually just sat down and wrote a series of, I was like, what kind of cliche, what trope would I like to explore, and then just do it my way. And I think that's the thing with any writer, is that it's always your unique take on the world and on writing, your voice, your take on the trope that will make it fresh and interesting anyway. Like, aren't there only 7 stories or something like that?
Right. Yeah, that Vonnegut quote. Right?
Yeah.
How would you describe the Blaze line to someone who has yet to read it?
Well, the way I used to always sort of think of it was sex first, feelings later. That's not necessarily a rule, because obviously there's a million different stories and writers came at it from lots of different angles. I mean, there were certainly ones where, people knew each other previously and were getting back together, et cetera, et cetera. But there was always, kind of a basic rule was that we had to have a very strong, intimate encounter within the first 100 pages. And so a more sort of conventional romance, you build towards the physical intimacy as part of the, the climax, if you will, of the story. That's part of the evolution of the relationship, is that you become emotionally close, and then physical closeness is kind of the next inevitable step. But like with Blaze, often it's sex first, and then working out that you actually like each other beyond being, someone that you just like having sex with. And so that was always kind of interesting to think about stories from that angle. Like, how do you get from being, get them into bed quickly, but then still leave them with a journey, an emotional journey to go on to realize that they love each other.
Yeah.
Okay, this is so fascinating, and this is really like the big reason why we want to explore this project, I feel like. But okay, I've just been taking notes. I'm trying to like read through my scribbles. So, intimate encounter within the first 100 pages. When you think back, like culturally, why did we need that? Why? What was happening that like readers were wanting sex? Blaze, to me, is it's one of those lines where the sex was the selling point. You think of
Yeah.
dare, you think of temptation, you think the same thing. What was happening culturally, whether in books or just in pop culture in general? Because we've had the opportunity to talk to booksellers and they're like, Blaze was the line they could not keep on the shelves. What was happening?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, when did Sex and the City come out?
I think 2 years before Blaze. We've
Yeah.
looked into it because Joanne Rock, we had the opportunity to chat with author Joanne Rock, and she's kind of let it be known like Blaze was kind of an idea that came because Sex and the City was a hit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about it before, but that was the thing that popped into my head then. It's modern. It's a very modern way of looking at relationships, isn't it? And it's more possibly skewed younger. It's not I dated my boyfriend in high school and we got married and then we had sex and had children, which is, you know, obviously a very common story. It's my sister's story, actually. But it's there's also a lot of other young people who, you know, have several relationships before and a sexual history before they find someone that they feel that connection with. And you meet in bars and you meet at parties and you meet in other crazy situations. And sometimes you have sex with someone before, you know, that the sex isn't something that you hold off on as a sort of big prize at the end. It's a more modern take on male-female relationships, isn't it?
Well, what do you think it was about Blaze that readers at the time enjoyed so much? And, you know, with it being a line that's closed, is still such a reader favorite. I was thinking to ask, like, at the time when you were writing for it, did you realize like you were writing for something that readers really, really loved reading?
Look, I don't think you do get that sense. I mean, you know, you'd get letters and you get nice reviews and all that sort of stuff. But I think as a category, romance in particular, you do sort of sometimes you feel a bit disposable as an author, and so I don't. I mean, it's really lovely to hear that. I think that they were books that allowed women to explore their desire. You know, they were really sexy. I'm sure that, you know, women who read them found them sexy. And I mean, I used to joke about them being, you know, a square marital aid, and I don't think that's a bad thing as well. I think it's great for women to have that imaginative outlet and to explore their sort of fantasies in that way. And you know, you can fall in love in the pages of a book. You don't have to, you know, and bring that energy back into your relationship.
Yeah, it feels like sex positivity's been here for a while, but you know, and 2005 to someone like myself does not seem that long ago, but there was still, you know, and still today a lot of stigma just around, you know, premarital sex. And so it's interesting that you know, that I guess the recognition was there, but it's still just a mystery to us why the line came to an end.
I get numbers. I mean, really, I wasn't still writing for them when it ended, but it's always about numbers. And I think Blaze in particular did not have book club subscriptions behind it, like SuperRomance, the other line that I wrote for. They had pretty strong subscription base with a book club sort of database, I guess. And but they were much more women's fiction-y. I mean, my super romances still had quite a lot of sex in them, so but some of them didn't as well. Yeah, I think that's probably it. And I also think that the first what was that first digital imprint that's still around? Starts with I. Entangled. Starts with E, not I.
Entangled. Okay. I was like, is it Entangled or Thule? But you said I, and I was like, I don't.
Oh my God, that's how bad I am. No, I think Entangled, the very first line of books that they brought out actually was that Brazen line, I think, was pretty one of their really early out ones, and that would have absolutely taken on some of that market. And it's interesting, I think, when you look at category romances in general, the one big mainstay that still has a really strong brand recognition in terms of like when you look at it, you know exactly what you're getting is the presents books. And
Yeah.
what tended to happen, I think the other categories often had a broader tent and less restriction in them. So, I mean, I can even remember there was a Blaze ghost story at some point, and maybe even an historical in the Blaze lineup. And I think from a reader point of view, maybe with presents, you know what you're going to get most of the time. It's because they're very good about knowing what a presents is. And I think that maybe even with SuperRomance and Blaze, etc., as I said, it was a pretty broad tent, and maybe the experience of reading a Blaze is like maybe the commonality of there's going to be a lot of sex in this book was not enough to get people to really commit to the line because they didn't necessarily know what they would get every time they picked up a book, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've got a Christmas time travel Blaze sitting right next to me here that I'm in the middle.
We've read Cowboy Vampires from Blaze.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure they don't do that in presents. And,
I would be fine with it, though.
Yeah. No, and I think that's fine. But then, you know, you can see how that sort of muddies what maybe was the original intent, which is like a Sex and the City style sort of thing. I think one of the things that I noticed happening for myself when I had written I think I wrote 12 Blazes altogether, I feel like. But you did sort of, I reached a point where I was like, I've written a lot of sex scenes now, and how do I make them feel different for me and for the reader as well? And I noticed with some of the other Blaze writers that sometimes the first encounter between the protagonists was handcuffs and melted wax and spanking or whatever. And I wondered, I mean, I never asked anyone this, but I did wonder whether that was them going, oh, I've done sex against the wall already, so I need to change it up. But I sort of made a decision early on to go, these are different people. And so when these people have sex up against the wall, it's going to be a different experience than other people in other of my books who've had sex up against the wall. And it's, I mean, you know, there's only so many ways that you know, slot A can go into, or, you know, tab A can go into slot B. And so you're, of course, going to repeat sort of situations or positions and things like that. But it's about what is said and done around those situations that makes it unique.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as an Australian reader and writer, do you remember how the Blaze books were marketed locally to you?
No, not really. I mean, the big place that you would go to get them would be Target, which I know you guys have in America as well. I think they're not the same company, but they're fairly similar, sort of lower tier department store, and they would have that, and there's a couple of other sort of same level department stores that would have a book section, and there was a Mills and Boon section that would be merchandised by them and swapped out every month. And you would go there, and I can remember the red Blaze insignia. I mean, I think I actually probably hadn't read much in the line when I got published in it, and when I was starting to look at it, and when Wanda suggested that be one of the ones that I look at, I think I went out and bought a whole bunch of them and, you know, read up, did a little bit of study. Which is an interesting thing, because I think usually you do often target a line to get published, but because I targeted one that was defunct, I sort of ended up there a little bit sideways in a sort of slightly crooked journey.
Well, you touched on it a little bit already, but I mean, we had Temptation first, in, you know, over 1,000 books, and we had followed by Blaze. It didn't have as many as Temptation, and then we had Dare. But you know, we're really trying to figure out, you know, maybe with Blaze and Temptation, it really does seem like maybe because the restrictions were a little bit, I don't want to say, it feels like there was more room to do everything. Whereas like Presents, like you said, we're always going to get that fantasy, that fairy tale, like, you know what you're going to get with a Presents or even with a romance.
Yeah.
It seems like, the reins were a little bit loose on those two. Dare, I don't know. You didn't see like cowboys or anything or time travel with Dare, but in the end, these sexier lines just have not been able to last. Like,
Mm.
is it a numbers thing? Is it we don't really know how to market this? And you also mentioned like the book club aspect of it, which I mean, I don't know how important that is now, but I know once upon a time it was really important. So, what are your thoughts on like why these three in particular just were unable to last in comparison to like a Presents or a Romance?
Well, I think they kind of cannibalized each other, didn't they? I mean, certainly Temptation and Blaze were, there's, in the Venn diagram of what those categories represented, I think there'd be a lot of crossover. And then they also introduced that very erotic line. I can't remember what that was called, but there was a period there where they had, that was like a really, like a still romance, or still had a happy ending as far as I know, but it was like really like a lot of erotic content as well. So then I guess if you're a reader who's coming to these books, maybe you go over there to get, if that's what you're really looking for, if you know what I mean, if you want more erotic content. So I think there was a lot of sort of bleeding into each other's zones in some of the other categories. I mean, SuperRomance always had a sort of a longer read and lots of intergenerational, sort of conflict and representation of families, etc. And then there was also the American Romance as well, which probably there was a lot of crossover there, and Silhouette Special Edition. I sort of felt like those three kind of occupied very similar territory as well. I wasn't particularly good at differentiating between, sometimes I think it was maybe just, I mean, obviously the Americans were all set in America, but sometimes it was about that it was the writer who was writing for that line, and that was the person that you followed as well. So, I mean, interesting to me anyway, maybe not to anyone else. But when I did start writing for SuperRomance, I kind of assumed that the people who really liked my books would read my SuperRomances as well, and I don't know that necessarily happened. I think some people did, but I think others didn't. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, again, you kind of touched on these next two, so I'm going to blend the next two questions together. But like we said, in 2005, online communication wasn't at the point that it was today. We don't have the social networking and things like that. What was networking like between the Blaze authors, or just other Harlequin authors like back at the time? And you had mentioned that you weren't writing for Blaze when it was at the end, but were you in communication with any other writers at that time that you got that feeling that the line was coming to an end?
Yeah, I mean, I had picked up the vibe that was happening. I mean, I think they went to digital only first. They stopped doing print. And they did the same thing with SuperRomance as well. I mean, that's just usually the death knell for me.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think if they're not going to bother doing print books, especially when we now know that a lot of people still, like a huge percentage of the market, still like holding a paper book in their hands, you're kind of cutting a line off at its knees. And so I can remember when they made that announcement at one of the romance writers conference, and I sort of was like, okay, I could see the writing on the wall there a bit as well. But then, they were also launching these new lines at the time. I think there was Carina Press was coming out, and they were because they were trying to sort of, I guess, be out there with Entangled, doing digital publishing more. And there was also, I want to say Modern or something like that was there are a few new lines that they launched that you were kind of looking at them, and you'd look at the descriptor and you'd be like, well, isn't that just what the one that you just cancelled was doing as well?
Right.
It's like they were trying to rebrand this. They were trying to create a new category when the other category had declining sales, but it was really just the same thing with a different name. And, you know, they'd go through all these livery changes and branding changes. I mean, there were some writers that I knew, like Kelly Hunter is an Australian writer who's very beloved. But she sort of was asked to be like a lead author on some of these new lines or whatever. And I think, you know, that can be quite taxing when you're sort of taking a bit of a hit for the company, really, when they put you out in front and then maybe the line doesn't do what it's supposed to do and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm speaking for Kelly when I say that. She's never said that to me. But, you know, there was a little period there, I think, where Harlequin, Mills and Boon were trying to sort of stop the hemorrhaging, if you will, and with category romance. Yeah.
Well, I find it really interesting that, you know, when we think about going digital, right? And this is at a time where I feel like, you know, digital was really booming. But like you said, a lot of category readers still enjoy that feeling of like physically holding a book, you know. And I think of, okay, after Temptation and after Blaze, the next one in the lineup was Dare, and it was digital from the beginning.
Yeah.
And it just kind of feels, as a fan of that line, like this was kind of doomed from the beginning, you know. But also living in America specifically, I'm like, I would never expect to see Dare on the shelves at Walmart, you know, living in very conservative Texas. So what do you do? You know, it just feels like when it comes to the sexier stories, if you can't really figure out how to put them out there or what to do with them, they're just kind of doomed to not really last that long. And I think in the end, the people who enjoy it, the readers, are the ones that are like, you know, dang, you know, like kind of missing out.
I think there was this sort of the industry wisdom was that people who read at the more erotic end of the romance spectrum were happy to read digital because it meant, you know, it was a brown paper bag, you know, for their book cover. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I, as a sort of little sidebar, there were constraints in Blaze on the language you could use. So we weren't allowed to. Well, I wasn't allowed with my editor to use fuck.
Even though, I remember hearing this. Yes.
Yeah.
Even though, like, you know, you're picking someone up in a bar or meeting them, you know, you're drunk and you're in the same hotel room for some reason, or whatever it is. I mean, the thing you're going to say is "let's fuck," and sometimes it was the only word that was right for what was happening. And
that made sense, right?
Yeah. And every now and then I would like test the waters and, you know, pop one in there. And it would either get changed to screw, which is a really, I think of it as being a very American kind of a word, and not that I just don't. Nobody uses it, do they? Really?
No, and it's not very intimate. More in just like a sense of like being deprived of something, like, you know, having something taken from you. Oh, I got screwed.
Yeah. No, it is, isn't it? And so I can remember that happening, and so I would just take out the sentence. I would change it completely. I'd be like, okay, well, if I can't have the word that I want, I'm not using that one, and would sort of reconfigure things. But I do remember my editor saying to me, essentially, one of my books is not going to be the reason that Blaze gets taken off the shelves at Walmart. And that was a concern, obviously, within the company, that they were selling these pretty raunchy books with erotic content were just sitting there on the bookshelves in these stores, and that if anybody, you know, chose to pay attention and shine a light on it, there could be a really big stink about it. And especially, you know, I mean, probably even more so today, to be honest with you, because the internet has made it so much easier for everybody to be outraged about everything. And so that was definitely something they were obviously aware of.
Okay, so this made me totally think about a conversation I've been seeing a lot on Twitter. It happens all the time, but like, I don't know, recently it's been really happening because there's just been the cover controversy never goes away. But like, okay, so I'm imagining myself in here in the States in South Texas at the Walmart looking at the category section, which I personally think is fantastic. But I think of like, okay, with Harlequin specifically nails the marketing, right? You have a couple of seconds to get our attention. We're going to pick up the book. It says Blaze on it. You can clearly see from the cover, however it's illustrated, that it's a sexier book.
Yeah.
Is this why we are having these conversations with the more illustrated covers where if you're 14-year-old, the father of a 14-year-old girl who sends you to the bookstore and she's like, pick up this book. It has this pretty cartoonish looking cover. You're none the wiser. You're not going to think that the word fuck is in there. Do you think that's, does that appease the stores a little bit better than, a Blaze where it's like you can't say fuck in it, but the book is clearly about having sex?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's really interesting. I've actually got the rights back to most of my books now, and I'm in the process of going through my Secret Lives of Daytime Divas series, which is set on a soap opera, and that was Take on Me, All Over You, and Hot for Him, and they're the fourth, fifth, and sixth Blazes that I wrote, and I've commissioned an artist that I know to do illustrated covers for those for me. And I did that because that's the cool thing right now, and that's what people seem to be looking at. Also because I feel like those stories were always a bit more sort of single title-ish rather than category, and I feel like it gives them a chance to kind of escape that category constriction a little bit, or perception. And one of the great things about working with a cover artist, an illustrator, is that you can get exactly the moment that you want depicted on your cover, and you don't have to rely on stock photos that don't exactly look like who you want your cover, and they're not in the situation that you want, and all that sort of stuff. So there's that part of it. It's funny, isn't it? Because I do sort of look at some of the covers that are out there at the moment, and I think they look like young adult, and that's and I sort of wonder about that as well. I mean, the first round of illustrated covers, those the chick lit illustrated covers, I think the covers we're seeing now are quite different to them, and there's a lot more variation perhaps happening now as well. But I think that sometimes there can be a bit of a mismatch between an illustrated cover and content as well, just in terms of that thing that you're talking about, that sort of, I don't know, just sort of gives a lighter, buzzier, sort of fluffier feel, doesn't it, for some reason?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you read it and you're like, oh, this is super deep, really, really sexy.
Yeah.
Well, this may be difficult, but of your Blaze titles, do you have a favorite?
I think it's probably Anything for You, which was my third book, and it's about best friends who fall in love with each other. She's always known that she loved him, and he's a sort of dyed-in-the-wool committophobe pants man, and she goes away for a holiday with her sister and her sister's children, and she realizes that she wants to have a family. And while she's away, this is right at this is actually the beginning. That was like a prologue, really, that I didn't even write. This is just in my head. But she realizes that she's not going to have any of those things while she is so bonded to this best friend of hers. They have warehouse apartments that are above each other in the same complex. They own a magazine together. They spend all their time with each other. And so the sort of relationship slot in her life has been filled with this man who is everything to her except a partner and a husband and a lover. So she sort of comes back and begins this painful process of separating her life from his. And because she's utterly convinced that, there's no chance of them having a relationship with each other. And he reacts with confusion and bemusement about the fact that she wants to sell her half of the business and she's going to move from her apartment, and she's starting to date all these people, and he's, you know, jealous and threatened and all of those sort of things, and so they have to work their shit out. So
I
I loved writing that story, and it took me a long time because I've written quite a few friends to lovers stories in my career, and it took me a little while to work out that I think the reason why I keep coming back to it as a trope is because that's kind of my husband and mine's story. We were friends for a year before we became a couple, and it was the most torturous year of my life. And because, you know, I just wanted to jump his bones, and he wasn't in quite the same place at the same time. And so I it was like a little light bulb moment for me where I was like, oh, okay, that's why you're doing that.
Well, that premise and the way you have described it, it sounds so touching, and just like there's so much heart in it. I can just sense it, how you're talking about it.
Yeah, well, you know, they love each other, but not in the way that she needs and that he's ready for. And then I think my second favorite Blaze is She's Got It Bad, which is a sort of, oh, well, I sort of think it has been kind of a bit epic because it starts when she's 15 and then they reconnect again as adults, and he's had a messed up upbringing, and her family have very generously taken him in and given him a roof over his head. But him and the daughter of the household have got this sort of really fierce attraction to each other, but he's a little bit older than her. And when they get to the point where she's sort of, you know, he's hanging around his, he lives in a studio sort of bungalow thing in the backyard of the house. And when he comes home one night from a party and she's sort of loitering on the doorstep and basically, you know, kisses him, and they end up on the bed, he realizes that he can't stay anymore, and so he takes off and forges his own way in life. And she is heartbroken and sort of acts out in teen ways that kind of end up sort of damaging her both physically and emotionally. And then years, I don't even know how many years later, is it 10 years later or something, he's in an art gallery and he's got a friend who's trying to get him to spend some of the money that he's earned doing custom motorbikes to, you know, have a bit of an art collection in his house. And he sees this nude painting of this amazing woman on the wall in this gallery, and he knows that it's Delaney. And he's like, cover that painting up. I must have it also. And he kind of seeks her out and wants to save her from this kind of life that she's got, which is that she's the lead singer of a punk band and is a tattoo artist, and she's sort of sometimes is maybe not doing the healthiest things for herself, but he's a bit messed up as well. Anyway, it was such a fun book to write because it was so angsty and was in this kind of very sort of edgy sort of space with the tattoos and the band and the trauma and all that kind of stuff. And I had a lot of, is it wrong to say I had a lot of fun writing it? Sorry, but I did.
No, I'm sold.
I know. We love hearing that you had fun writing it. So.
Oh, why would you do it otherwise? It's torturous. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It has to be, you know, you spend months and months and months with these characters in your head, and you think about them all the time, and you have amazing ideas in the shower and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that you do, it's an obsession. Writing a book is an obsession. It has to be, otherwise you'd never finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. Well, are there any other Blaze titles you'd like to shout out as must-reads?
So I did a little search to prompt my memory. So Karen Kendall was one of my favourite Blaze writers. There was a series she had called The Manhandlers, which I remember with great fondness, but I think that almost anything that she wrote has got some fun, spiky dialogue in it, and, you know, sexy times. Kathleen O'Reilly was also another one I can remember really loving at the time, and Samantha Hunter as well. And I realised I didn't really answer your question properly before. You were talking about sort of the internet, or the, you know, the book community in its infancy with everything going digital, etc., and how did we connect with each other as Blaze writers. And I mean, there wasn't necessarily a lot of that sort of thing. We did towards the end have a sort of Yahoo group where we would exchange thoughts and ideas and a bitch and stuff like that. But I did, I worked with Samantha Hunter. She suggested that a bunch of us get together and create a blog. This is back in the days when people still did blogs. And we had one called Love is an Exploding Cigar. And we would all take turns posting content to that, etc., and sort of work together to promote Blaze and be out there online.
I mean, is this blog still around? Is it still floating around out there somewhere?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's gone, I'm sure. But, we came up with the title because it's a quote from, I can't remember who said it. I should know. But love is an exploding cigar we willingly smoke. And we loved that. So that was what we called our blog.
Well, you've touched on writing for both Blaze and SuperRomance, and you wrote for both for a little while at the same time. So creatively, what did you enjoy about writing for these two lines at the same time?
Look, I'm spilling all of the tea today. So I'm sort
Thank you.
I'm just old and a blubbermouth now. So I originally started writing for SuperRomance because I had been told that they would not take more than 3 books a year for me writing in Blaze, that there was so many people in the stable for Blaze, and that was how many slots were available for me. And so I wanted to be writing more. I wanted to be writing full time, and I had been told by somebody at Mills and Boon Australia that the way to build your career was to get books out there as quickly as possible, and to do as many a year as I could. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll write for another line then as well. And I knew there were quite a few writers out there that were doing that. They were writing for more than one line, like maybe they were doing presents as well as medical romance or so I started writing for SuperRomance, and then as soon as I did that, the senior editor of Blaze cracked the sads so hard. She was butthurt about it, and basically would not schedule my books. So I had handed in like completed manuscripts, and she just wouldn't give me a slot. And when I spoke to her about it, she said, well, Sarah, you have to understand I need to support the authors who are supporting the line. And I was like, this is the same company. I couldn't believe it.
How am I not supporting the line? Like, I'm
absolutely nuts, right? Like, I was just, are you serious? I mean, I think now I would be a Karen, and I would complain to upper management about it. It was just outrageous. And if you don't want me as a company writing for more than one line, then don't contract me.
Yeah,
and
that's really weird. That's really weird. It's all like one team, one fight.
Yeah, nuts. So I ended up just going, all right, well, I will just not write for you anymore. And I stopped and wrote with SuperRomance, which, was probably quite a good fit for me in that I would always write too long for plays. I was always, so it's like, oh, look, maybe it's an extra 5,000 words, and sorry about that. And SuperRomance was good. I got to stretch my elbows, my wings, and get my elbows out a little bit. And also that you could still have very sexy stories in that, but like there was a broader sort of reach for the stories as well. Like you could have, Blaze didn't want you having cute dog stories, you know what I mean? And grandpas and babies and all that sort of stuff. So you could sort of do a little bit of everything with SuperRomance as long as it was that longer story with sort of good emotional depth, etc., which I was kind of doing in Blaze anyway, I always felt. So it wasn't that big a shift of gears for me. 85,000, when I started writing for them, was 85,000 words was the total, which is like essentially a single title romance. Yeah. And then they were like, oh, that's a lot of paper and ink. Why don't we cut that down to 75? And we were going, oh, okay, we'll do that then. Still charge the same amount for the books, but, the readers won't notice. And then they cut it down to 65,000, I want to say. I could be wrong on that. And, of course, people noticed then. And then they went, oops, we've made a boo-boo here, and then bumped the word count up again. But they'd lost their readers by then. Like a whole bunch of people went away and didn't come back. It was just crazy decision-making from the company. And I think that is a huge part of why the line lost so many readers and why eventually sort of just disappeared down the gurgler.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm looking at my super romance section on my shelf right now, and I'd always wondered they're all just such different sizes.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
so different from all my other Harlequin sections on
I
my
mean,
shelf.
right, going like 20,000, that's a
Huge difference.
20,000 word difference.
Yeah, yeah. And that means the writers who were probably used to doing a story with a subplot were now maybe only delivering a story without a subplot,
They had
or
to
they were
cut that
trying
out.
to, or they were trying to squeeze. I don't know what the other writers did, to be honest with you. I mean, I found it really tough. It didn't last for long, that really short restriction. I think they realized that was just a bridge too far pretty quickly. But it was just, yeah, it was really some really crazy decision making, I think, in that period when they were maybe just internally freaking out about self-publishing and Entangled and the rise of all of those, sort of losing their dominant space in the bookstore. That was their great sort of advantage, wasn't it? They had that amazing monopoly on the shelf space in all of those retailers, and then that didn't matter so much anymore. Which is kind of amazing when I think. I mean, they were such a huge part of my teen and 20s was, going down and buying one of those books and buying all 6 of them for the month. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, are you currently working on anything you can share with us?
I've got a 4-book series that I'm doing with Chule Publishing, the Carmody family. And so the 4th book is on my desk, desperately wailing for attention. I've been sort of a little bit distracted by the fact that the soap opera that I have worked on for 24 years here in Australia has recently been axed. And after 37 years, Neighbours has just stopped. In fact, their final episode is airing this Thursday in Australia.
Oh my gosh.
UK. Wow. So that's been really emotional, actually, and distracting. And I've had some, I shared with you guys, I didn't want to say it at the beginning, but my father died recently as well. And so it's been an interesting time. And in the wake of sort of losing that Neighbours work, I was freaking out a little bit. And then I've landed work writing a rom-com feature film for an American production company. So I'm hoping that will get over the line and that will turn into a movie that people can watch. And I'm writing for a UK thriller TV show as well. So all of those things are sort of a bit more urgent deadlines than my Paul Carmody book, which I keep on getting letters from people asking for me. Is there going to be a 4th book? And I'm like, yes, there is. Oh my God. I feel so bad about it. They've got the cover ready for me. I know what the story is. I just need to apply bum to seat and write. So yeah.
Well, firstly, I love seeing romance writers kind of pivot into the world of screenwriting, like learning now that you've been writing. And I think someone told us once upon a time, I feel like maybe it was Allie Blake. I've heard that you were writing for TV, but I know also like Jennifer Snow's been writing a little bit for TV. And I'm like, yes, like let's have the women that write these novels writing for TV. Yeah. But I have to ask, this is so nerdy of me. I just remember growing up watching Young and the Restless with my Nana. And I'm like, that show still comes on. So like, how does a soap opera that's been going on for so long come to an end? That's so sad.
Yeah, I think I think that a lot of those American soap operas that are still the ones that are still going, I think are they digital or online only, a lot of them now. And usually soap is a really efficient story production model, and each episode of Neighbours is very economical to produce, but there's an enormous amount of them. Like we're 5 nights a week, 48 weeks of the year. So that's a lot of, even if, each little increment is not a lot of money, when you add it all together, it's a shit ton, right? So I think what sort of happened was that the UK the UK channel were wanting to do other things, and they had so much money committed to Neighbours that they couldn't do those other things without basically losing Neighbours. And that was the predominant sort of income for the show. The local broadcast network here in Australia wasn't contributing as much to the show as it had been in the past, and ratings weren't as great. They switched it across to a digital-only platform, gosh, I want to say 10 years ago or something, and, you know, it's just never attracted the same amount of viewers, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, look, 37 years is an amazing run. It's amazing. And,
absolutely, yeah.
You know, Neighbours is the show that brought the world Guy Pearce and Kylie Minogue and Margot Robbie and...
oh, really? I didn't... Wow.
Yeah, a whole bunch of other... you know, Russell Crowe was on it. Chris Hemsworth's brother was on it, very briefly.
I run to Kylie Minogue music.
Yeah, there you go. So she got her big start on Neighbours. She put out a single when she was still on the show, and it was just a massive... That was a Locomotion. It was a massive, massive hit. And then she pretty much was so successful that she left the show.
Yeah.
Well, where can everyone keep up with you online?
Well, look, I am a really bad social media user these days. I do have a Twitter account. I'm at Mayberry Sarah on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm probably not super active at the moment. I have a website. You can sign up for my newsletter if you want to find out when I have new releases. I will not send you a monthly or weekly email because I just am not great at marketing. If I have a great deal or I have fantastic news or I have a new book out, you'll hear from me. That's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This has been incredible. I mean, you will have to come back. You have to come back.
Please.
I'm such a blabber.
It was perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for being the first episode for our Blaze project. This is exactly what I think we imagined it to be. It's just incredible. So thank you, listeners. Make sure you check the show notes. We will have links to all the places where you can keep up with the incredible Sarah Mayberry, as well as where you can get her books. So make sure that you are checking down there. And Erin and I will chat with you in our next episode. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.